Welcome back, everybody, to the Dark Matter Digital Network. This is Hyperspace. I'm Solaris Blue Raven, and I'm here with my very special guest, Dennis Stone. And Dennis, you with me?
I am with you, Solaris.
All right. It's great to have you on board with us tonight, and thank you for sharing. And also, let's cover the StonehengeUSA.com. That's your website if people want to access and know more about this site and how to visit, right?
Exactly. Yep, the website. Yep, you can go to that. And we also have an email address on there, so if anybody has a question or something, we would be glad to try to answer that for them. And so we have a website, we have a telephone number there, and then the email address. And but we are open every day of the year except for 2 days, Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so we're open in winter, and we do snowshoeing up there in the winter, so people can still access the. Actually, in the wintertime, we open up the entire hill, all the trails all over the hill, including the glacial cliff shelter where we found that Native American pottery is open. Other seasons, we kind of limit the hill to the astronomical trail and the main site. So we open about 20 acres of the 110 acres. So,
Nice.
but the website has all that information on there, so it's pretty good. We have special activities that will be, like summer solstice or winter solstice. What we're doing on those days, that kind of thing. And we have paranormal groups coming in the fall. To do
Nice.
things.
I'd love to make it up there. I'm going to have to get up that way at some point in the continuum. You know what's interesting? I love snowshoeing, and I noticed you have that by candlelight, and I thought that would be so cool.
Oh, it's beautiful up there, yeah. And we light up about a mile and a half trail, and we have hot chocolate cookies, and you go up there. We have them for rent, and you can bring your own snowshoes too if you have them. And I think it's probably at an hour or so, and you walk on the trails, and it's really pretty up there. And you can see, because it's a big hill, you can see off into the distance, and either under the moon or just under the stars, either way, with a torch. We have candles, so it's very, very pretty. And you see all the deer tracks. We have turkeys. We have all sorts of wildlife. And we have our own animals, too, the alpacas, so you get to see all of that when you come up there.
Right, and why do you have the alpacas?
Yeah, it's a good question. Everybody asks us that. Why are they here? I sent that interested, I think, around 2002. They were on TV quite a bit, on different, TV. They were advertising them, and there was a big market for them, and primarily because they're kind of neat animals. They look like something from Star Wars, I think, so they're kind of cool to look at. But their fiber is really wonderful to make clothes. It's about 3 times warmer than sheep's wool on the average, and but they're a South American animal, they're from down in the Andes, Peru and, down and through Chile, I guess, and different places down there, I think in Ecuador too, up in the mountains. But people don't realize that, they're actually, the nickname for them is the South American camel. And so they are related to the llamas, or cousins. And when we have school groups, we always say, what do these guys look like? And they say, oh, like a big giraffe. I'm like, well, that's a wrong family. How about another big animal? And they go, well, a camel, or a llama. And I said, that's right. I said, you know why? And that's something I wouldn't know it either if I didn't have them, that these actually are camelids. They're all part of the camel family. And I said, what do you think they came from originally, millions of years ago? And Egypt always gets the credit for the camels, oh, yeah, they came from Egypt, And then I'll ask a similar questions about where the nearest pyramids are, from where we're standing. And this is all part of an archaeological dig. We do a little, pre-briefing before the kids start doing the dig. It's on an unsensitive area. It's kind of like we have simulators for flying, and this is our archaeological simulator. So kids have a lot of fun with that. We get about 7,000 school kids a year. But I do a lot of them, and I really enjoy it with the kids. But they say, well, pyramids are Egypt. So it's always Egypt. So even the adults and chaperones and teachers, and they're like, oh. So I said, well, actually, the camels are all from North America. They find camel bones and llama bones from Florida to Arizona, through Tennessee, all the way up to the Arctic Circle in Canada. And they're here for 45 million years, and they actually became extinct somewhere around 8,000 years ago. Out in Arizona, not too long ago, they found the remains of a little camel and a big camel in a Walmart parking lot putting trees in. And there they were, and they carbon dated them to about 8,000 years, which is actually a surprise. We thought they had died out much earlier. So these guys are around for a long, long time. And so these animals we have on display, we have 80 alpacas. Their ancestors are all from here, so it's kind of educational.
Right.
And as far as the pyramids go, we have actually some kids guess Mexico or South America, where there's some incredible pyramids, and I've still seen a lot of them in Mexico. But actually, the United States has some of the neatest pyramids in the world, and when we go through school or even college, they don't even talk about this. It's like they don't even exist.
Yeah, hidden in plain sight. There's no doubt. And I know that before we headed for break, we were talking about the sacrificial table and how it was. They sealed up certain holes. I wanted to make sure we recaptured that for a second here, and also ask you about Dr. Fell and the language, which was assumed to be Phoenician. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That chamber I mentioned that had the big 7-ton 7-8 ton stone that fell into that we got the free carbon dating from. We talked about that in the last hour. We also found 3 stones with markings on them back in 1964. 2 of them were found underneath the fallen roof slab, and the third one was found in 1967, I think, near the entrance of the structure. And 2 of them, actually, the 2 that were found in 64 sat in our building for 11 years. And the other one also sat there for, I guess, for 9 years in the building as unknown markings. But Barry Gill came around to our place in 1975 for the first time. He had already been studying ancient languages and scripts most of his life. And he was living in Arlington, Massachusetts, and he was a professor at Harvard. And he looked at and studied these, took them back to his home in Arlington, Mass, I believe. And he had a group called the Epigraphic Society, about 1,200 members around the world, so he also had a lot of assistants, a lot of people helping him. But he was able to identify the markings, and one of the stones, kind of triangular shaped, maybe about a little bit more than a foot across, kind of flat, maybe an inch and a half thick, for the 3 stones, basically, kind of similar in size. But one of them he identified as Iberian Punic, and he said that the script appears to have come from Spain and Portugal. And because the Phoenicians had a city there in a city called Gades, or it's Cadiz, Cadiz, Spain. And I've been to Spain before, so the Phoenicians were definitely, they were all around there. They had 50 trading cities they set up, including Carthage, but Cadiz was one of them. This was a melting pot, so you had people up there from a lot of different places around the Mediterranean, Africa, and Europe. There were in Spain and Portugal, a lot of people there, multilingual. And so that script that was Iberian Punic said that structure, the chamber in ruins, was a sun temple dedicated to Baal on behalf of the Canaanites, because the Phoenicians were the Canaanites, actually. The word Phoenician comes from the Greeks, and the Romans called them the Phoenicians of Punic, or people of the purple cloth, and the Greeks called them Phoenicites, I guess. I'm not sure how they pronounce it, but something like Phoenicites could also meant people of the purple cloth or whatever. But they were actually the Canaanites, So this is a sun temple dedicated to Baal, the sun god, on behalf of the Canaanites, was his translation, correct or incorrect. But the other one was Libyan, and the Libyans were, up there too in Spain and Portugal, and the people would have been multilingual. They would have been able to probably speak multiple languages, and then you had people that were able to write it, probably very few could do that, but they would have probably been multilingual also. And so the Libyan script, he couldn't really translate the whole thing because part of the stone was busted and part of it's very eroded. And the other stone that came near the entranceway actually just looks like a stone with sort of like, it was just like a design. Somebody was just actually doing a design on it. And the design kind of looks like some of the designs, artwork, if you will, of that area of Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. So those 3 stones are found in that chamber in ruins. And then Barry Fell went on to identify Celtic Ogum that was found there after his visit. The first time we found some more stones after we were looking at all over the place, and we found a few more inscriptions, and one out near the glacial cliff shelter where the Native Americans were. It looks like a big letter G, and he said that's either a Phoenician sun symbol, or I believe it could be Libyan also, and that's in his book too. It's called the G symbol, I guess, but that stone's still in situ. It's still sitting out there. The rest of them are on display in our museum. There is a deer carving inside the oracle chamber too. It looks more like an ibex, like a European animal, rather than a deer. Maybe somebody was having a vision quest in that chamber, and they made this neat little deer. Goodwin knew about it in the 1930s. It was already there. In 1967, one of our guides was giving the tour. They used to give full tours back then. And as he was exiting the chamber, the oracle chamber, he looked over his head on the ceiling, and the stone ceiling was an arrow. And we don't know what the arrow means, but it faces kind of like the southeast. And it's just, so that's the second carving in the chamber. Just like, why did they do that? What was the purpose of that? What was it pointing to? Kind of with the solstice sunrise, but yeah, it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Well, wouldn't that be a marker to like maybe I don't know, maybe some treasure? I'm thinking like a pirate.
The ancient map, I know.
But is it? Well, you never know. I mean, wouldn't you do something like that? I mean, put a marker there and an arrow pointing to a direction of something. Wow.
Something of importance, sure. And some people even interpret the walls. Because back in the 70s when I started flying in 1974, we used to go up in small planes. I was building hours so I could be an airline pilot eventually, but we used to go up a lot and do photographs all over New England of these ancient sites, Vermont, Rhode Island, Matt, all over the place. It was a lot of fun back in those days, and had a blast, actually. And my uncle used to go with us. He was a World War II B-17 and B-29 pilot, and got shot down during the war and everything. So he'd go up with me too, we had a great time together. He's 93, he's still living.
Oh, wow.
But he was very much involved in the alignments. He was a member of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society, the New England Antiquities Research Association. He helped form that with my dad in '64. And, we go flying over, and he was good at photography, so we go up to shoot a lot of these sites. But the walls at our site are pretty amazing, too. They have one area looks like a wall, a gigantic area that looks like the shape of a sacrificial table, and right in the middle of it, it looks like a dagger. It's a big kind of a bow tie-shaped wall. Mm-hmm. You wonder, a lot of people interpreted that, as, some people think that it is a map. There is a book out, actually, and that those walls form a map showing how to get back to the old world by going in a certain direction, taking advantage of the trade winds and the ocean currents and that stuff, and they could return to the old land, So
right.
People kind of interpret things, and who knows, if that's inaccurate or whether that's possible, intentional or something. But the walls up there are really interesting. Those walls cover actually they go beyond our land, too, into the neighbor's land. So they cover a lot of property up there, these big stone walls, and they have a lot of standing stones in them. And big stones are quarried off the bedrock. Now, farmers in our area, starting in the 1700s, began building a lot of range walls, and they wanted to get rid of these glacial deposit stones so they could plow their fields. A lot of rounded type boulders, they use rocks. But these are slabs of stone that were actually removed intentionally from the bedrock. Why would you go make stones when there's plenty already on the ground?
Right.
It's kind of productive. You don't want to go making more stones. By busting up the bedrock. You got enough of them here already. So
it's fascinating.
A lot of work went into that.
Right.
Our stonemason.
Oh, go ahead.
Overhead.
No, I was going to say it's interesting how it bleeds through to your neighbor's property. So that's a huge site.
Yeah.
I mean,
it is.
Who knows what's there?
I mean,
in all different directions.
Yeah,
it's fascinating. Exactly. And you said you did aerial mapping. So when you were up there, you were doing aerial mapping photography. Is that what you were doing? You say?
Yeah, we're taking a lot of photographs, mostly photographs, and it would show all the wall patterns. We go up there in the wintertime. Sometimes in the winter, the snow melts just enough off the wall so the walls stand out real good. But now they have technology they put on planes called LiDAR, and one of Scott Walter's shows, they showed, I think in Georgia, they were trying to find out whether the Mayans had made it up into Georgia. And that LiDAR, these planes are based in different parts of the country. They were just doing Connecticut recently, I guess, in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. And that was in one of the publications. I'm like, oh, that's really kind of neat. They've been mapping more historic stuff down there, some of the 17 and 1800s, some of the towns that don't exist anymore, some of the old roadways and where some of these towns were abandoned and stuff. But probably looking at Native American stuff. And I think that LiDAR would be very good because it's like, again, X-ray vision. It can actually see things that you can't see from the surface, Mm-hmm. And some of the ancient roads out in Ohio, between like Newark and Chillicothe, that road that goes over 60 miles, it was an ancient roadway that was like 30 feet across. They plowed it so much in the last 200 years that you can't see it from the ground for the most part. But LiDAR actually detects that. When you're flying over the plane, this special equipment, you can actually see it again. It's like, oh, there it is. Mm-hmm. So this could be very useful for finding sites, finding old trails, finding structures that are still there that nobody's noticed on the ground. When you walk around, you can't even see it, but it's right in front of your face.
Yeah, there's layer upon layer. It's interesting, too. You touched on, I know on your site you have people that go in and do dowsing. I think that's more, I don't know if that's ceremonial, but have you done any dowsing over there at all?
Yeah, so my dad found a well so he could open up the visitor center back in 1958, I think. He was down dowsing, and then that well was used up till the 1990s, actually. So I don't know if it works, but he actually went out there, and somebody taught him how to douse. But we do have we had the New England Dowsers, I guess it's an association or whatever. Mm-hmm. And just recently, we just had a gentleman up there on the August 1st. He's been to the site for some other paranormal things, but he's a really nice guy. He's down to earth. He does like a briefing in a theater, and he tells you what they're going to do and everything, what's going to happen and how to do it. And I think he had an audience of like about 30 or 35 people this time on August 1st. And he took them up there, and he went up there, I think, looking for, they try to douse for artifacts, douse for energy, and in some cases water, that's very important too. So yeah, people have been up there dowsing. I tried it when I was a kid, and my wife even had somebody give her dowsing rods. I don't know if they work, maybe they do work. Some people really go by it. And they do it in European sites too, They do go out there and they douse for these sites and structures and ley lines. And so it might work, My dad found water, I guess. So.
Oh, you should try it now because I have dowsing rods and they work all the time. They seriously.
It's pretty neat. And
Yes.
Well, a lot of the visitors just coming through just on a daily basis will have their own, and they'll go up there, and there's no harm, they go up there and they douse, and then they tell us about what they find. And a lot of times, it's funny, sometimes people come up individually and come up with the same answer, like, you should check this area. It looks like it's a area that something happened at. And then the next person will come back, a different person, months later come up and tell us a similar story. So, but the problem is, they'll say there might be something here, but in order to do a correct archaeological dig, it takes a lot. You have to get the people, the resources, and you have to do it properly. You just can't really go up and start digging, So that's frustrating for us because there's a couple areas I'd love to have dug up myself, but I'm not really qualified. But I want to get myself qualified eventually, but I'm not. So
you can put a marker there, put it on your bucket list. Yeah.
Exactly, and that has happened too. Yeah, we mark certain areas and we've had like the past president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society when she was president working on our site, and we were very, very fortunate to have her and some of her associates spend time up there as volunteers. We're so happy to have them, and they found a lot of neat things, including that wigwam site, a workshop area where some material actually came from Saugus, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. They actually brought the material up. It was, I think, rhyolite, and they were making tools out of it on the south side of our hill. They was actually importing material. So all these type of things she's been finding up there, So there's a lot, I think, that we'll still find in the future,
Oh, absolutely. I think you haven't even hit like the tip of the iceberg with that whole thing. I'm wondering if there's anything like a labyrinth there, or anything that indicates something of that nature.
The walls are kind of interesting, I don't know if that's that's another thought, these walls, some of these walls are really, I don't know if you do look at our website, I'm not sure if they have the, like all the walls in one of our pictures there, we have some really surveyed wall, we used to sell these great big maps of the site back in the late 70s, early 90s, and then we never had them printed up again. It was actually a nice big, very detailed, accurate map of the main site, about 1 acre, and then it had about 25 acres with the standing stones on it too. That was a separate one. And it had the horizon, it had all the azimuths of all these alignments, it had the elevations and everything. It was really good. And we used to sell those at the site. And I don't know if they put that on the website. I'll have to, but that really gives you a good idea what the whole, site. I actually made a diorama of the site in 1977. So when you first enter our visitor center, that's the first thing you'll see. You'll see little yellow lines on the diorama. Those are all the astronomical alignments, and it's correct to elevation, and it's about 1 inch equals 20 feet. I did that when I was a college student, and we use it as like when you first walk in, and above it's a TV that shows you different pictures of the site and different things you'll see on your trip through the site as you visit,
Right.
So that's how you enter our visitor center. So a big diorama of the hilltop, basically,
Nice.
in the site. Yeah, kind of neat, and that gives you a really good feeling of what the hill looks like,
Right. So I take it you have survey markers and all that good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, the gentleman that surveyed the site in 73 through 77 is still around, and he's interested in the next project we're going to do in the Chamber and Ruins.
Cool.
And he's retired from survey work, I guess, but he still has an interest. He got the interest back in 73 when he first visited. It was for business, but as time went by, he got really interested in this, and he did a lot of property and deed searches. He said, your walls don't line up with any old property. Your walls, on top of that, don't look like colonial or post-colonial walls either because of the big slabs standing on end and everything. They don't look like your typical walls of New England, which there are thousands of miles of walls in New England, but they just don't look like that, he said, So
Right.
It was interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a surveying background, by the way, so I'm always interested in all that. So that was my past
You
life.
can appreciate that. Yeah,
I
you can
can.
certainly appreciate
I love to dig
that.
for
Yeah.
stuff and look for old markers and things like that.
And when you came up, I think you'd see the walls, and you can see the difference between, like, the wall that was, there's a couple walls right down near our visitor center. We think they're historic. We think they were King James range walls from around 1750, sometime around then. And then as you get on the top of the site, you'll see a different style. We don't have all those field stones. We have a lot of quarried stones, as I mentioned earlier. It's like a different style of building. And these walls, sometimes they'll have an area that these walls will run around in a big circle, and there's no entrance. It's just a big enclosed area. It's like you couldn't put an animal in, or you'd have to lift them up to put them into this area. And it's not for agriculture because the soil's very poor up here. You say, well, maybe they had a field up there, growing something. They want the animals in there, but the soil's very, very, very poor for growing crops. It's not irrigable. It's full of rocks, dirt, and that's part of that shovel test pit study that the former president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society did. That she only found one plow mark on the whole hill. just one plow mark out of all the shovel test pits. So the Patty family, I don't know where they grew the crops, probably in the lower part of the hill. It was reported to have a cornfield down low where the soil's deeper. It's down in the valley area, not on top, where it's so rocky up there.
Wow. Yeah. And so American Stonehenge, obviously it was featured in David Body's books, right?
Yeah, it's David Brody. Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
So David Brody, yeah, I know.
Okay.
No problem.
That was Mark.
He's a friend of Scott Walters, too. Yeah, it's David Brody. Yeah. And he's been around for, I would say, at least 10 years. He's out of Westford, Mass. And his town has a really interesting artifact. It's called the Westford Knight that's been featured on Scott's show, among other History Channel shows and History 2 shows and some other outlets, and a movie, actually. And that Westford Knight's very fascinating, And that's how Dave got involved with all of this, I guess, because of the Westford Knight. And then the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, and that's more of a medieval time period, 1300s, 1400s with the St. Clair family. And in our museum, we put up anything from Columbus going before Columbus, We put up some information about these unusual sites that may be pre-Columbian, including the Westford Knight, the Newport Tower, Dungy Womp, that kind of thing. We do put things on our maps so people are aware that there's other things out there, too, from just about the time of Columbus going back. So, because no explorers before Columbus is what a lot of mainstream historians, scholars, and even archaeologists said, yeah, there's nobody here before Columbus, And then in 1963, they showed the Vikings actually coming to Lonzo Meadow, Canada. That was proven in 63. And then that kind of cracked the ice a little bit, So there may have been other people coming over well before the Vikings and Columbus, That's what we're interested in, anything like that. North, Central, South America. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they even talk about giants. I mean, I don't know how much you know about that, but there's been talk of giants and even the little people. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of that or heard any stories associated over there.
Yeah, we have. I've heard of some of that. I mean, even in Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire, we go up there. It's a beautiful lake in central New Hampshire. It's beautiful. But in one of the books I'm reading about the lake, there's been many books written about Lake Winnipesaukee, but one of them talks about finding a giant skeleton on one of the shores up there, And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. But we have met Jim Vieira, and Jim Vieira was a member of my dad's group. My dad didn't meet him, I don't think, because my dad died 6 years ago. But Jim Vieira had his own TV show on History last year, Search of the Lost Giants, I think. And I believe he's got something new coming up, but like Scott. Scott's show had a 3-year run, Scott Walters, and he was a member here at one time, too. So two of my dad's members had TV shows. And, the giant thing is very interesting. And the only frustrating thing is actually having evidence, having the whole skeleton that somebody can do DNA of, examine it, see it, make sure it's real, not something that they created, Right. And it is a real giant skeleton, like, 8, 10 feet tall, whatever, because the stories go on and on and on, all the way from here to California, down to South America, over to Europe. There's gigantic people, and it's interesting. The only thing is we can show you that these sites exist. I can take you up and show you our site. But I don't know, where I could show you a giant. But I think that's interesting. I just hope they are able to prove that if it truly did exist. So
I agree.
Yeah, Jim Vieira's been to our site. Yeah, when Jim Vieira came in, we met a couple other people like Andrew Collins from Ancient Aliens. They all came in walking one after the other one day, and I said, back in May, I think it was, I said, I know who these people are, but I've seen them on TV, but I can't put my finger on it. It was Jim Vieira, Andrew Collins, Hugh Newman from the Ancient Aliens, and Dr. Greg Little. They all came up, and they've been doing a lot of research, and they've been staying in contact with me, and they have a new video out, too, 15-minute video. It's
nice.
America's Stonehenge, A Mystery Hill, and it's on YouTube. So it just came out about 2 weeks ago. So it's actually pretty good.
So they can record when they go out there? They can take a video camera?
Yeah, there are certain things we have, certain rules, about videotaping using commercially, and they fit within what we needed, and I reviewed it. My wife and some of the others reviewed it, so that just to make sure it's not something totally way out. And I've seen them on TV, all of them on TV, enough to know the type of. So they did a very nice, and they kind of kept it down to earth. It was very well done. So that video was out, I think, in the last 2 weeks, and it's on YouTube. And when you go into that, you'll see a bunch of other ones. Leonard Nimoy did us in the 1970s, and you'll see his video from In Search of on us. We're number 2 out of 144 shows.
Nice.
Leonard Nimoy did. And William Shatner just did us a couple of years ago, so we had both Kirk and Spot through shows. And Rod Serling did us in 1970. That was one of the earliest ones we had. It was called The Unexplained. It was an NBC show.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it was really neat. And, that year I was on WOR on Ivan Sanderson's show. It was actually Barry Barber at WOR in New York City. We actually went to New York City and talked at the studio downtown Manhattan. My dad and one of our researchers, James Woodall, all three of us went down there. We flew down there out of Logan and went down there to LaGuardia and then stayed a night or two or whatever. And we went and talked on. Ivan Sanderson had a group called Situ, Search of the Unknown, I think it was. Situ, I think it was. And he used to be on the Gary Moore show with all these kind of really cool animals. The Gary Moore show was a big thing in the 60s and late 50s. He used to be on that all the time. But he had his own research group trying to study all these unusual things around the world. And we actually visited his house in New Jersey. But he was the host that night. Barry Popper must have been off, and he interviewed us. And he knew my dad anyway. He knew all about the site. He'd been to the site. So we were guests that evening. I think that was the first radio show I did in 1970. So it was a really good year for us. Mm-hmm. Kind of exciting. We had some carbon datings around that time, so we had a lot to talk about,
You've been busy. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, we did.
Who would have thought that site would attract all that action, right?
I know, and the people in the 1930s, like H.P. Lovecraft, visited our site, and they still have great big gatherings for H.P. Lovecraft. I think down in Athol, Massachusetts. I think the Dunwich, what was it called? The Dunwich Horror, I think it was. And our site may have been the inspiration for that. There's been a lot of research done on that. So H.P. Lovecraft still has a big following. And Alex de Crowley actually came to New Hampshire and stayed at Newfound Lake, although he used a different name. And some people believe he visited our site too, because Newfound Lake's probably, I don't know, back then it would have been a lot longer because we didn't have the interstate highways, but it's not too far from Newfound Lake. It's just, probably about 60, 70 miles away. And they think that he actually visited our site too,
I wouldn't be surprised.
So,
I don't know.
Yeah, with all his, his religious, I guess he went from one religion to another.
Well, it's all craft-oriented, but you're still working around solstice and ritual and lunar activities. So, we all do that.
And our site could fit into that pretty well, to that type of thing.
Oh, I'm sure it's a charged area. Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's artificial. Yeah, that would have been a magnet, for these type of people, for sure.
Oh, for sure. I'd like to come up there. Like I said, I'm going to have to come up there. Now, do you have camping, too? Or no?
No, we don't. We do have camping areas near us.
Okay.
One time we let people on certain days, stay at the place, but we've expanded our nature trail right through the old camping area. It was kind of an informal camping area. But there are, if you just go to our website, I think there's links to other places. Like there's a couple right nearby in local towns, a couple of nice camping areas, and we can also if you call us, we can help you out with that too. And also, you just go to like New Hampshire, state of New Hampshire, they have a website for camping areas too, and some are only like 5 miles away, some are a little bit further away, and there's so many in New Hampshire, I can't keep track of them. But there are a couple of local ones too, so you can bring tents, or you can bring your RV with you. And sometimes they even have places they rent out too, vehicles. But there's one of them that has like 500 acres, has its own little golf course and airport and everything right up the street from us. So
that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah.
It sounds like a nice little getaway. It really does.
Yeah.
I'm putting this on my list, Dennis.
Yeah. When you visit us, you're really close to the coast of Maine and the White Mountains. It's very pretty, and Boston's only about 40 miles away. So about 40 miles north of Boston. And, we've had people say, well, if your site was visited by ancient people from overseas, you're quite away from the ocean, actually about 18 nautical miles, about 21 statute miles roughly. And the Merrimack River comes up within 4 miles of us, and that's navigable up to that point. And between us and that bend in the river, it's all swamps and brooks. And what we're trying to find out, and unfortunately the archaeologist, her husband was a geologist, he was just getting involved after retired from 30 years at Tufts University. He was going to help us out, and he got, unfortunately, into a car accident. He passed away, which was really, it was a tragic loss. We were kind of shocked about that. But he was getting involved with that. We were trying to find out what were the rivers like back then. Could you navigate up to within a mile of our site? Because right up, within a mile is all these ponds, swamps, and brooks right into where the bend in the river is. But on the west side, where that glacial cliff shelter is the Spigot River, and that is a tributary of the Merrimack. So it was probably a lot closer you could navigate to the hill 4,000 years ago. The area is silted in, and also earthquakes have changed the elevation of the land. We've had earthquakes up here constantly. And we've had a lot of geologists explain what that is. It's just the earth is still rebounding from the glacial period. There was about a mile of ice above us about 19,000 years ago. And when the glaciers ended, we were compressed down about a quarter of a mile to a half a mile. And when the ice melted, all that weight was gone, and the earth is still rebounding all these thousands of years later. It still, has tremors. Earthquakes are basically, well, I had a couple people tell me there's no difference between an earthquake and a tremor. It's the same thing, just a matter of magnitude. But anyway, we have them constantly up here anyway, so and that's
Really?
caused
So,
damage to the site.
wow, when you say constantly, how often are we talking for those earthquakes?
Oh, every year it's on TV in New Hampshire. There's an earthquake. In fact, there was one just recently, I think, and they told with the magnitude. Sometimes you can just barely feel them, And some people, depending where some people, I felt that one last night. And it's just the earth rebounding, it's very slow. It's different than what you find in the San Andreas Fault out in California.
Okay.
And
so it's not fracking oriented, right, Dennis?
Right, yes.
Okay, I was just curious.
But,
okay.
Yeah, but there was one in 1727, I believe it was, off the coast of Cape Ann, right off Massachusetts. It was devastating, I mean, it knocked down barns, houses, and with kerosene lamps or candles, they caught on fire, and it was really a mess, It was pretty. The witnesses to it told how horrible the earthquake was. So and that could have caused damage to some of these structures besides the quarrymen, knocking the roofs in on a couple structures, So that's a possibility. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, the earth would set, or maybe the ground settles a little bit more, and some of the structures sink in. Do you think they're sinking or no?
I don't know, but I think one of the things is the elevation of the ground has changed slowly, rebounding. And so an area that you could sail in, say, 4,000 years ago, has not only got silted up by sediment going down the hills, washing and slowly building up. I've seen a pond near me in the next town over go from where we used to, people used to take boats out there and we snowmobiled on it in the wintertime, turn into from a little pond to like a swamp to it looked like it was just how would you describe it? There was hardly any water left in it. It was like just a mucky mess, It's probably good for the wildlife, but it was no longer a place you could take a rowboat or a small boat out. It was just silted in so bad, and the beavers had built a dam on it, and it actually changed the whole thing from a nice pond, maybe about a half a mile across, to just a bunch of weeds,
Right.
So that's only in a couple decades. It's the 1970s. When I used to go out there in the early 70s, it's changed a lot. But yeah, so you probably could have navigated pretty close to our site. Now, near the mouth of the Merrimack in Massachusetts in 2010, they were doing construction on a home, and out of the ground came a coin. It was identified as a Phoenician coin. Yeah.
Again, the Phoenicians.
Yeah, the Phoenicians again. So it's like, what is that doing there, Was it a collector, or how did that get there? So it came out of the ground, not too far from the mouth of the Merrimack, and that would have been the way that they would have approached our site. There is a Carthaginian coin in I think it was a Mount Holyoke, Massachusetts, Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. A professor there does a lot of study on this, and he looked at this coin, and one side, I forget if it's a horse head of the Phoenicians or whatever, but the other side, it shows like some sort of very tiny markings on the coin. If you look at it with a magnifying glass and you really magnify it, what he says it it shows the western part of the Mediterranean, western part of Europe, and part of the northwestern part of Africa. And if you go across to the left a little bit, you see what looks like the peninsula of Florida and part of the seaboard of the eastern seaboard of North America and the Gulf of Mexico. And the Phoenicians kept everything quiet because the Carthaginians were the Phoenicians, were it's one of the major cities of the Phoenicians, but they kept everything very, very quiet. They had a trade monopoly going on, but they would do things like that in your face. You wouldn't even know it. But they had a map right there, and that's what he thinks it is anyway, a map of the Atlantic Ocean with showing North America, which is pretty neat.
Oh, yeah, that's incredible. I still think you have some hidden treasure there somewhere. That's my impression anyway.
Yeah, I know, right? That's the thing. Every time I go over there, we actually bought 2 acres on the west side of the hill. My dad bought a couple acres on the north side back in the 1980s. And so when I go to work, when I'm not flying, I go across the hill on an ATV, or we can walk, or a snowmobile, or snowshoe, or whatever. And I just found I've been going by a wall up there for decades, and I finally looked at it the other day a little differently, and I walked over to it, and I think I found and I told some of the people I mentioned before, like Jim Vieira and stuff, because he's into ancient walls. Besides giants, his big thing is walls, because he's a mason, And I mentioned to him and a couple other people, I think I found what I call a rattlesnake effigy wall. Yeah, I looked at this thing. It looks like the head of a snake at the end of the wall. The wall is about 31 feet long. It doesn't go anywhere, just right there on the hillside. And it sits right in front of your face, because I go by it all the time. But I finally walked over to it about 2 weeks ago, and I said, what is, I said, this looks like a snake's head on the end of it. It's a rock probably about 2.5 to 3 feet across. It's tilted down, and in front of it's this long, very long, skinny stone in front of it. And at the other end, and I think that's a snake's tongue. And I go to the other end of it, 31 feet later, there's a big oval stone. It's got a lot of moss on it. It's kind of a very flat oval stone about 3 feet across on the other side of it. It faces kind of the southwest, I guess. We got to get up there and measure it, take GPS coordinates of it and everything. And I think it's actually an effigy wall. And you got the Serpent Mound in Ohio. This thing kind of looks like that. And actually, the head actually has a big notch on the side of it. And it's fallen over, obviously, from people or time or earthquakes, whatever. It fell over. And just next to it, this stone with a point on the top of it. I think the stone actually, the notch fit into the notch actually accepted the pointed stone and would help hold it in place, on top. But something's actually toppled the stone down. So that's something I found about 2 weeks ago. So we're still finding stuff there all the time.
Wow.
But that is a effigy wall. It's one of my newest finds. I don't know. It's just there. It doesn't go anywhere. It just, it starts and stops in 30 feet. Somebody took a lot of time building this thing. For what purpose? I have no idea.
Yeah, that's just it. They're markers. They're obviously marking something. Yeah.
Yeah, and because the serpent if it was a serpent, it looks like that. That was many ancient people worshipped that, including down in Chichen Itza. I visited that site back, and my wife, the serpent going down the El Callisto, and during the equinox. But the serpents are all over. I mean, everywhere you go, you talk about snakes and snake worship, serpent worship.
Right.
So,
and of course, that links into the esoteric too. I mean, in the Kundalini associated with it, the four-body system. And yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like you have a lot of exploration that you still need to do right there in the illusion of, right? Hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, it's in plain sight, and the thing is, to actually prove it's very difficult. You look at it, you say, I think this is what this is. I don't know if it was though. You get enough people looking at it, coming up with a consensus of, I think you got something there. It'd be kind of neat to take that big stone and photograph it very carefully, and then put it back on top and see if it actually balances on there. I'm going to talk to the stonemason and see what he thinks about it. I mentioned it to him also. He's been with us since 1978, and he was kind of excited about that because he's really walked the hill, but in the 70s and 80s, and like I mentioned, my son Kelsey found a bunch of these quarry stones. We've also found a couple other features out in the, we think you found the remains on the north. We have two cliffs, the west cliff where we found the pottery, and on the north cliff, we actually think we found a stone structure, and it's probably about 1,000 feet from the main site. It's on the true north alignment, and it looks like they were building it, and we think we found a roof slab about 100 feet away that they were preparing to put on it, but they never did. And this stone has been actually shaped. They actually were dressing it using hammer stones. You can see where they're actually striking the side of it, percussion flaking, like a gigantic arrowhead, shaping it. But it's just sitting there, and they never completed the structure, I think. I think they were building the walls, and it just never happened.
What's really interesting is there hasn't been a remnant of like a skeleton or anything like that, which would indicate that they buried their dead there. It seems to me like I'm very interested insofar as why they left. What made them leave.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. What became of the people? Did they assimilate with the native population? Were they at war with them, or did they just? Some people think the end of the Bronze Age, caused because it was a big thing. Bronze was like gold, and it was a driver of the economy. But when the Bronze Age became the Iron Age, maybe that was part of the problem. And also at the end of the Carthaginian Wars, the Punic Wars. The Phoenicians basically lost their power in the Mediterranean after Carthage fell, so that may have been a point where, this back and forth was cut off, after the three Punic or Carthaginian Wars, at the end of that, the Romans won, and that might have been the end of people going across the Atlantic, because they destroyed Carthage pretty good. I guess they plowed the whole city under and took 50,000 prisoners, and that was the end of Carthage, and the Phoenicians might in the Mediterranean pretty much went away at that point, so that might have been the end of them coming over here. There's different theories on that. Why did it stop? That might have been one of the reasons too.
Right, exactly. Well, do you think that the megalithic yards could have been a unit of measurement found there?
Oh yeah, that's another. Yeah, when Roscoe Whitney, William B. Goodwin's foreman on the job back in the 1930s, he had a plane table, so he did profiles and plan views of the whole site, which is great, and because Malcolm Pearson photographed it. So he has some really good records of what was going on there, before Goodwin did anything and during his work. Well, Roscoe also tried to measure the structures, very carefully as part of the whole thing, And when he said he didn't come up with, he couldn't figure out what measurement they used to make these structures. It doesn't conform to inches, feet, yards, or the rods that people used to use. It doesn't conform to any of this. And it was a puzzle to him. He said, well, it doesn't conform to this. What were they using for a measurement? And in the 1970s, when I was building a diorama, one of my colleagues at the museum, he worked there, and he's also a researcher and a member of the NERA group. We all went up there, a couple of us, we went up there and started measuring the structures, using the megalithic rod just for kicks. And it's about 32 inches. It's 2.72 feet. And the site seemed to conform to that, either coincidentally or maybe our measurements are just off a little bit, but it does seem to be the megalithic unit used on the site. And Roscoe Whitney, the MIT guy, he wasn't around at that time. He might have been interested in that for sure. But just last year, my son and I went back up there, and this year too we did a little bit. Went back up and we started taking measurements again because there was a number of researchers interested in that. So we went back and we measured some of the structures, and again we seemed to find a megalithic unit. And it has been found elsewhere in the Northeast, out in New York on the Hudson River. Some of those sites have been measured, and elsewhere in New England. And it seems to that measurement seems to come up. So that'd be another very important thing, as a piece of evidence, maybe supporting people coming over from the old world with this unit,
Right.
Measurements are very important, for sure, yeah.
Exactly, and if it links to the Stonehenge culture.
Exactly, yeah. And we met, actually, Dr. Alexander Thom from Scotland back in 1983. He passed away in 85. He's the father of archaeoastronomy, which is, that's huge, how these ancient sites all over the world were aligned with the sun, moon, and stars, and some planets in some cases. And we met both Dr. Alexander Thom and his son Archibald Thom, and they have both passed away since then. I believe the grandson, and we may have met him, I don't recall, he is supposed to be carrying out the work, which began in the 1930s, and they measured sites all over Scotland, France, England, Wales, Ireland. And that's where he came up with the units of megalithic inch, megalithic fathom, megalithic yard, megalithic rod. And he said these people were very, very organized, and they're very intelligent, and they actually just didn't haphazardly lay these sites out. They actually used a measuring stick to do this, very careful measurements. And they were aligned with the sun, moon, and stars. They were aware of both the solar 12-month cycle and the lunar 18.61-year cycle, which most people in the world don't even know about today, but the moon has an 18-and-a-half-year cycle. And our site shows that too, it is aligned with the moon through its major and minor movements over the course. And I remember 1969 was the lunar major north and south. They start with the year we went to the moon, and then every 18 years and a half after that is the lunar majors, halfway, about 9 years after. So 1978 would have been a lunar minor, So it was majors, minors, but the majors or the minors for each cycle is 18.61 years, and the ancient people actually saw that, witnessed, and they set up structures, particularly in Scotland. They had these recumbent stone circles up there. They're actually very large stone circles, and there's hundreds of them, and they're actually graduated in height, and they're so far north in latitude that during the course of an evening on the lunar major south alignment, the moon actually runs over the top of these graduated stones in the stone circle when you're standing on the north side looking south. The moon actually runs tangent to the stones, and it goes over a flat stone they call a recumbent stone. Some people say it was for sacrificial purposes or whatever. And then it runs down on the other side on that particular year. So in 1969, if you were standing on the north side looking south on a particular day, you would see the moon actually skim the top of this stone circle, and because some of the other stone circles in Scotland did the same thing. And he's the one actually discovered that these ancient people thousands of years ago were tracking that. And these stone circles are actually laid out like using Pythagorean triangles, the 3, 4, 5 triangles, isosceles triangles. So they were aware of Pythagoras triangles before Pythagoras was, thousands of years before Pythagoras was born, They were already using geometry,
Right.
So measurements and geometry and astronomical alignments, and we seem to have that on this side of the ocean just like they do over in the British Isles.
Right. So there's some kind of a network that was going on without cell phones and computers, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were people, as smart as people today. They didn't have some of the things, the same tools, electronics we have, but they were very, very smart, very capable people.
Exactly.
And very good astronomers, good mathematicians, good engineers, and they knew how to move big stones. Some of these stones they moved in the ancient past were thousands of tons. And we still don't know how they quite did it today, Right. At our site, the biggest stone they moved probably was 50 tons. And that's a pretty good piece of stone to move.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of them are 8 tons, 10 tons, and even they and they take a lot of knowledge, and you have to be very careful moving these big stones because you can kill yourself in an instant. But our master stonemason, he thinks that they use simple machinery when they built our site. They used inclined planes of earth, log rollers, and log levers, and he kind of gives us an idea of how they actually created the site. And when they built the structures, they might build the walls, and they put wooden cribbing inside to make the walls stable before they put the roof on, or filled it in with dirt. And then they put these large roof slabs, and these roof slabs actually, as I mentioned before, weigh several tons, and they actually have lips on the side, like 90-degree cuts on the edge. I don't know how they did this, but they, like on an edge of a stone going across several feet, they created a 90-degree cut in the stone, and it forms a lap joint. So that lip, if you will, a lap will actually come up and it interconnects with the next stone and makes a really nice structural tight fit. They connect together, in other words. And they actually were able to do that. They did that at our site. And he's went and discovered a lot of that. And it's like, how do they actually do that? How do they make these 90-degree cuts without modern machinery, to do that?
It's very impressive, without a doubt.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it. Yeah, he still doesn't know either, And how did they lift these stones off the bedrock? We were just talking about that recently, and he's been there for since 1978. And he says, I still don't know how they were able to lift these big slabs off the bedrock because when, and he's a master stonemason because many times when you try to work a fissure or a crack in the bedrock, you start to try to raise the stone, you drive wedges in or whatever, a piece breaks off. These people were able to get off multi-ton slabs in the shape they wanted, and then they just work the edges and dress it up a little bit. We don't know how they did that, We don't know what technique they used to separate the stone from the bedrock because it's pretty hard. Granite's like a number, I think, 6 or 7 on the hardness scale. It's pretty tough.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, you did say, I keep going back to the mining thing because I'm wondering if they weren't using water to some degree. I touched on this with one of my guests, I think it was about a week ago, but maybe they were using water to maybe define the rock or assist in floating it. I don't know. I'm just being a theoretical scientist here.
That's the point too. I think that's how they did the stones. Some of the stones of Stonehenge that came down from Wales. They may have floated them, and they moved them like 150 miles. They might have used rafts. At our hill, though, it's a big hill, and they were actually pouring all around the sides of it and on top of the hill, and they would have had to drag them somehow up on the hill, drag them up at a couple of degrees incline, and that was downhill's one thing, uphill's another thing, or on a flat's bad enough, but when you have to drag them uphill, that becomes a lot more effort, to do that. And that's what they were doing. They were dragging these things up the side of the hill to build the site, and I don't know what they used,
Very important site, apparently.
Yeah,
think about
a lot of work. A lot of effort,
it certainly is. Yeah. What about spirits? What about energetic signatures? Have you picked up on anything there insofar as, has anybody seen anything with an apparition or spirits or a haunt of some kind?
People, we have paranormal events every fall, October, and I think in late September, going up towards Halloween, and we've had different groups come in, and they'll do like a briefing in the theater, and then they'll go up there with all this equipment and cameras and all these different sensors, and they found, I guess, different orbs, of energy, and some of them they photographed, and you can see it in the pictures, and I don't know what to make of it. They'll show them to us, and so, a lot of times I was actually when I work at the airline. I'm usually working weekends, so I miss a lot. Usually on Saturday nights they do the paranormal events, in October, and I missed a lot of them. But I did go on a couple, and what the equipment detects, they have these things that detect energy, and they also have, and I forget the name of that equipment, but they have the cameras and infrared things, and they do see things. But we did have some visitors about 10 years ago up there, and they were filming in the Patty area, where the Patty house was sitting at one time. It's no longer there, of course, but in that area. And there's this misty, it looks like a person standing there. It's done during the daylight hours. And we did put it on our website for quite a while, and people, had their own opinion on what it could be, But it was kind of neat. It looked like a person, actually. It might be just a trick of light, with the air might have been humid, kind of misty, but it looks like a person. It really does. It looks like a person standing, like a ghostly figure, and kind of eerie. But in the 1970s, we had Hans Holzer up there, and I think he brought up Sybil Leek, but he came in there a couple times, and around 1974, and then he came back just before he was a guest on the show with Leonard Nimoy, the In Search of show. But he wrote books like Ghost I Met, and he brought in the psychic, to have a feeling or a reading of the site and stuff like that. So, and that was over 40 years ago, so I don't remember the particulars of that. But yeah, we have people out there all the time interested in the paranormal.
Right.
The site might have been a place where people were buried. It could have been a place of ceremony, sacrifice, burial, maybe weddings. So, in the Native Americans, we have a fire pit near the North Stone that dates 7,300 years. That was one of the finds we had in the 1990s, that people were on top of the hill 7,300 years ago. So we have many years where people were on the hill, and a layering of cultures probably. So if they're spirits, they could have come from many different time periods, all the way through the Paddy family right up to modern times,
Right. Well, it sounds like it's energetically charged, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And also what comes to mind, maybe some portals, maybe some kind of energy portals, a vortex of some kind.
And we've had a few books written. A couple came out lately about that, and actually one of them was well written, I thought, and we have it in our gift shop. And it's a pretty cool book, but it talks all about that kind of thing,
Right.
It's actually a pretty good book. It really is. But we've had other books written in the past, that kind of thing, But even going back, like I mentioned, to H.P. Lovecraft, using the hill for inspiration for the Dunwich Horror, and if you read it, it sounds like our hill, but it's down in Massachusetts, in Athol it takes place. But he visited the site with a guy named Mr. Munn from Rhode Island also, with their wives and everything, and they stayed at a place here, and they identify all the names. But in the story, the names have been changed. Like the Paddy family becomes somebody like the Patsy family or something. I forget, but the names change, but the first letter's the same. And
Right.
the Spigot River becomes a different river, but I think the river. So it's all the topography matches, the people match, and so he was at the hill, at our site. So it starts way back in the 1930s, that kind of thing.
It's fascinating. And Dennis, we're getting ready to wrap this up. It's been a pleasure to have you on tonight. I've just so enjoyed talking with you about this site. It's fascinating. So I do want to thank you very, very much for joining us. And also, I'd like to have you back at some point, so make sure you do that.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank you and your listeners and Mark Eddy, and we're going to do that archaeological project on that chamber in ruins. We want to get the roof slab out of there, and we want to do an excavation and do some new technology of Earth. They can actually date Earth, and if the Earth has been down there for thousands of years, when they test, it's called OCR, I think. So we may try that technique, and actually it tells you the last time the Earth actually, I guess, saw the light of day. So if we get Earth next to the structure, and it's we can actually date it. It might be another way of dating the structure, and that's something we're trying to do this fall, starting in September. It's something we started in 1964 and never was able to complete. So it's where the 3 stone inscriptions came from, and where we get the 3 carbon datings already. So that may be something we could talk about if that, if that project goes forward. That we can
Absolutely. Yeah, keep me posted, and I will make a trip up to see you, because I'm just feeling very guided to get up there and check it out. So, and also, yeah, absolutely. And I do want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and also please stay tuned for Dr. J Radio Live coming up next here on the Dark Matter Digital Network, of course. And what's the best way to get a hold of you, Dennis? If somebody has a question for you, I guess it's through your website, right?
Absolutely, yep. StonehengeUSA.com, and there's a website. There's a telephone number there, or you can email us or telephone us. Either way is fine. We'll be glad to try to answer your question.
Excellent. Do they have to make reservations or no?
No. The paranormal and the ghost hunts. Pretty much everything else you can just show up, even on the summer solstice. We had up to 1,000 people one day about 10 years ago, and we were on the Discovery Channel for that.
Excellent. And Dennis, we're out of time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Keith. Thanks. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.